Greetings, podcast listeners. I hope you're all well. This is just a quick warning up front that this episode has some graphic content. Not that most of our episodes don't have some sort of adult themes, but this one covers several. You know, it's got both of the big R's, it's got racism and rape, bunch of sexual assault. Just you know, and I've even put some heavy metal music at the end, so even that might upset some of you. I know, right? Anyway, yeah. All seriousness though, just a bit of a warning up front. This one has some heavy topics in it, but it's part of a grander sort of theme that we're going to cover over the next few weeks, so bear with us. Check it out. You might like it, you might not. It's a bit heavy, just a warning. Love you all. Catches.
Warning, the following contains graphic and disturbing audio. This has not been created for the glorification, but rather the sympathication of the victims.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Sean Jeffrey.
Historic day in Monaco. But first, let's catch up with all the news. Roscoe, there's only one story. Good morning again.
Yes, good morning Steve and Liz, and good morning everyone. Sydney has indeed won sport's biggest prize, the Olympic Games. We beat the favourites, Beijing, by just 2 votes in a secret ballot.
The moment had come. 5 cities waited as the IOC voting delegates filed into the Monte Carlo auditorium. Only they knew who would get the Olympics. The crowd were looking for signs. They didn't have to wait long.
The winner is Sydney, Australia.
It was joy mixed with pure relief. Unbelievable. They had worked so hard.
But we did it. It was all of Sydney. They did a fantastic job and we're just all thrilled.
Just the greatest moment.
Don't wipe the tears away, enjoy them. How are you feeling?
I can't believe it. In the end, you're just the best city one.
It was still the closest of results. Australia 45 votes, Beijing 43. So all those scare stories about the IOC not daring to ignore the giant that is China were wrong. It will be Sydney 2000 Olympics, a Games for Australia, a Games for the world.
Mesdames et messieurs, les athlètes de la 27e Olympiade.
Greece,
Brésil,
Tonight, we welcome the world's greatest athletes
Canada,
and their supporters to Sydney, Australia.
Denmark, France, Great Britain,
Good day, Sydney. Good day, Australia. The Olympic Games are back down under.
Kenya, Romania,
Espagne,
Trinidad and Tobago,
the United States of America, Australia,
Around 19 years ago, at the dawn of the new millennia, as the joy of the upcoming Sydney 2000 Olympics swelled through Australia, a frenzy of brutal attacks unfolded through the suburbs of Sydney. Over 4 horrifying weeks from August to September, a gang of Lebanese Australian Muslim youths went on a rape rampage targeting young, non-Muslim Australian girls. The attacks were so degrading and demeaning the judge described them as worse than murder. New South Wales District Court Judge Michael Finnane described the attacks as what you hear or read about only in the context of wartime atrocities. They were heinous crimes. Gang rapes that brutally traumatised at least 7 teenage girls and left all of Australia sick to its stomach.
He had no compassion whatsoever for the human suffering they were inflicting.
He was the one who was whooping and cheering and carrying on outside of the car while they were abusing me. I think he derived some sort of pleasure or satisfaction in inflicting cruelty.
You only need to look at his charge photograph when he was charged with the last of the gang rapes. And he's laughing in it.
The following reading comes from an interview with a former corrections officer at the Long Bay Jail, one of Australia's most notorious correctional institutes.
Clean that fucking shit off now,
the guard screamed. Bilal Skaf puffed out his chest, grinning. Fuck off, he said, or I'll rape your wife too. The guard pulled the key from his belt, opened the door and calmly walked towards the inmate. He looked at the wall where the graffiti had been scribbled. He then locked eyes with the skinny little smartass. I rape prison officers' wives, read Skaf's graffiti, which was scrawled in black texture across the wall.
Piece of shit,
the guard said, standing over the smiling criminal, looking up at him. What are you going to do? Skaf shouted back. Nothing. That's what. The guard smiled and then whack. First came the heavy right, and crack, then the left. Splat. The guard picked up the 22-year-old and threw him into the concrete wall. Quote,
Then I grabbed his head,
recounted the guard,
and I used his face to clean off the texture.
End quote. Bilal Skaf did not enjoy his Long Bay stay. First, he was bashed.
I gave him a real good touch-up when he came in,
said the guard.
Skaf was nothing and he had only just arrived. Someone asked me to give him a hand with this rapist bloke who was playing up. I went in there and saw this really scrawny bloke with a big mouth. It was Skaf. And he was just standing there all pumped up, looking at me, with the graffiti on the wall behind him. I toweled him up and wiped the wall down with his face. He had no remorse whatsoever for the crimes he'd committed. He never said sorry for anything, or, for that matter, anything he did in jail either. He was quite happy to cop a hiding, and that's exactly what he got.
He thought he was going to be some sort of Lebanese hero, said another guard. That he'd become part of their gang and be sweet. But one Michael Finnane, a Lebanese Australian triple murderer, Finnane is serving 3 life sentences plus 50 years with no possibility of parole. Even he had put the word out for him to be bashed. The Lebanese hated Skaf as much as anyone because he'd tarnished their whole race and made innocent Lebanese people targets because of his disgusting crimes. This is how this horrific story unfolds. It started on the 4th of August, when a 14-year-old girl who was weeks away from performing in the opening Olympic ceremony was approached by 4 men while travelling on a train to Punch Bowl in Western Sydney. In a vicious attack, she was punched, slapped, had condoms thrown at her, genitalia thrust at her, and told she would be forced to perform oral sex on the men and then be raped. Quote, "I've got a slut with me, bro. Come down to Punch Bowl," end quote. This was said by one of the offenders via text message. The girl was dragged off the train but managed to break free and escape before she was harmed. On the 10th of August, though, 2 girls, aged 17 and 18, were late night shopping at Chatswood Mall on the North Shore in Sydney when they were approached by 8 men, including Bilal, who introduced himself as Adam. With the promise of sharing a joint, the girls were lured to a white van with 4 of the men. A red car with another 4 men followed the van across the Harbour Bridge to Northcote Park in Greenacre. In the silent darkness behind the park toilet block, the girls were beaten and forced to repeatedly perform oral sex on 8 men for a period of 2 hours. The attackers abandoned their victims at midnight, and the girls were later discovered by a couple walking through the park. Just 2 days later, the gang struck again, although this time, it was even more savage. A 16-year-old girl was lured to Goslings Park in Greenacre by her friend Mohammed Skaf, who was 17, the brother of the, quote, rape master of ceremonies, Bilal Skaf. Summoned by text message, carloads of youths then arrived at the park. The victim was dragged across the field, pinned down by her arms and legs, and raped by Bilal and another man, while 12 men watched and laughed. Her screams of terror and pain were drowned out by the crowd cheers from a nearby soccer game. She said the attackers were, quote, standing around, laughing and talking in their own language, end quote. The men held a gun to her neck and then smashed her head against a concrete pylon. Somehow, with one leg still in her pants, she managed to run to a nearby phone box and then was helped by a man driving past. But August the 30th would be the most horrific attack of them all.
I think it's one of the worst crimes that has been investigated by the New South Wales Police.
Bilal knew it was wrong and he was enjoying committing the act, and I think he was particularly enjoying encouraging others to commit the act too. They just all came and sat down next to me and around me and just started talking to me. They were proud about being Lebanese and all that sort of thing, and they were disparaging about not being Lebanese, you know what I mean, like to me.
She, in fact, is a young woman of Indigenous blood, which explains her answer to the question that they asked her. They asked her, "Are you Australian?" And she said, "I'm as Australian as they come."
Well, at first it was a lot of joking around, just generally like normal teenagers. You know, a lot of laughing and stuff like that. It was all fun and games.
Wearing her best suit, an 18-year-old young woman sat reading The Great Gatsby on a train on her way home from a job interview when she was approached by a group of young men. Swayed by compliments, flirting, and the promise to go smoke some weed, she got off the train. When her mobile phone rang, though, one of the men snatched it off her and told the caller she'll only be 10 minutes. She was then abducted and raped 25 times by 14 men over a period of 6 hours. The men dragged her to a Marion Street toilet block at a car park next to the Bankstown station where she was raped by 4 men. Bruised and battered, she was then passed to another group and driven to Bankstown Trotting Club. On the way, they stopped at a service station where she desperately tried to make a run for it. Quote, "I tried to get out, climb over the seats to get out, but then the driver grabbed my left shoulder and pushed me down. I remember him rustling around and opening the glove box, and he took out a weapon and held it to my head. He said to me, 'Don't move, bitch, or you're dead.' All I could feel was cold metal." End quote.
He was tall. No, taller than me. The olive-skinned, dark-haired, and he just looked like a prick. Sorry, but he just had that look about him that said, "I'm not a nice person," and he didn't bother to hide it. And so I knew even from the beginning that Bilal wasn't going to be some, saviour on a white horse. He was going to hurt me too. There was Bilal on one side and the other guy on the other side, and the car took off and I just knew. They were playing rap music, and it was violent, like sexually violent, and so I knew by then, this is it. They're going to do it too. And sure enough, before the car was even out of the car park, they'd already started, groping me and stuff. So they thought it was funny. Like no one said put that away. Let it go. It was, we're not letting her out.
The victim first laid eyes on Bilal at the Bankstown Trotting Club, where she was again gang raped. Tossed from one man to another, the victim was called an Aussie pig. She was going to get it, quote, Leb style, and asked if Leb cock tasted better than Aussie cock. The woman was then driven to an empty industrial complex in Chullora, where another carload of youths joined in. She was again repeatedly raped on the back of a car seat, including at one stage by 2 men at the same time. In a final, demeaning dog act, the attackers hosed her down and dumped her soaking wet in the cold August night at a nearby train station. On the 4th of September, the gang once again approached 2 girls, both 16 at a Beverly Hills train station. The girls were taken to a house in Lakemba and were then raped by 3 men over a period of 4 hours. One of the victims was told, quote, "You deserve it because you're an Australian," end quote. All in all, 9 men would eventually be sentenced to a combined 240 years for these rapes. At least 5 men involved in the sordid crimes were never caught. Police said they believe there were many other women who, understandably out of a fear of not wanting to relive their ordeal, did not report the attacks, and that the true extent of the Skaf gang's crime wave may never truly be known. Judge Michael Finnane described Bilal Skaf as the leader of a brutal gang of rapists who spread terror in Sydney. New South Wales Premier at the time, Bob Carr, came under fire when he called for the names of the rapists to be made public. The Lebanese community said they were vilified for the attacks, but Mr. Carr stood by his decision. Quote, "These were adult crimes, and they were treated as adult crimes by the court. It would have been somewhat farcical to have not named them given the severity of their crimes." Crown Prosecutor Margaret Caneen also pushed for the perpetrators to be named. Quote, "The Australian Lebanese community deserves to have the spotlight drawn away from it and onto the individual perpetrators. Not naming the individuals places a burden on the entire Lebanese community, the vast majority of whom are law-abiding citizens." End quote. Conservative commentators such as Miranda Devine categorised the crimes as racially motivated hate crimes. The Sydney Morning Herald reported that the rapists had stated to a victim during the attack, quote, You deserve it because you're an Australian, and you're going to get it Leb style. End quote. 2/3 of Muslim and Arab Australians said that they experienced an increase in racial vilification towards them after a number of events, including the September 11 attacks, the Bali bombings, and, of course, these rapes. The gang rapes led to the passage of new legislation through the Parliament of New South Wales, increasing the sentences for gang rapists by creating a new category of crime known as aggravated sexual assault in company. Also, in the course of one of the trials, the defendants refused counsel as they believed that, quote, all lawyers were against Muslims, end quote. This led to the contentious prospect of the defendants, the rapists, being able to cross-examine the witnesses, the victims. This situation, thankfully, was averted by further legislation being put through the state parliament. Actions taken by government ministers, including Premier of New South Wales Bob Carr, who publicly identified the perpetrators' backgrounds, led to controversy. Ethnic community group leaders, including Kayser Trad of the Lebanese Muslim Association, complained that Carr was smearing the entire Lebanese Muslim community with the crimes of a few of its members, and that his public comments would stir up ethnic hatred. The first court case heard under these new sentencing regimes concerned the Ashfield gang rapes of 2 women by Pakistani and Nepalese immigrants in Ashfield on the 28th of July 2002. The attackers in these crimes used SMS and mobile phones to orchestrate the attacks and to phone ahead to other attackers to coordinate transport of rape gang members to the locations where women were being held. Authorities later released some of this material, recovered from the rapists' mobile phones. The attackers texted such messages as, quote, when you are feeling down, bash a Christian or a Catholic and lift up, end quote. Bilal Skaf began his sentence in Sydney's Long Bay Correctional Centre, but was soon moved to maximum security in Goulburn Jail after prison officers uncovered plans by fellow inmates to inject Skaf with HIV-infected blood. In March of 2003, Skaf was charged with writing a threatening letter to Corrective Services Commissioner Ron Woodman. The letter had been found in an internal prison mailbox. The letter read, quote, don't take this as a threat, but if all Muslims aren't released by January 2003, Australia and citizens will be in danger of a bombing, end quote. White powder was also found inside the letter. While awaiting a court appearance for the letter incident in July 2003, drawings of gang rape were discovered in Skaf's prison cell. The drawings depicted violence and rape against his former fiancée, who had ended their relationship in March of 2003. After she had cut off ties with Skaf, she was subjected to threatening phone calls and letters. She now says that he can, quote, rot in hell. According to Corrective Services Commissioner Ron Woodman, Skaf has not shown remorse for any of his crimes. Woodham also says that Skaf has warned prison officers to be careful outside of work as they may be shot. In April 2015, he was attacked by 2 other inmates in jail and sustained, quote, serious facial injuries. A former inmate that went by the name of Henry said another inmate, a pedophile, was brutally bashed while he was serving his time in Long Bay. Quote, there was a bloke who did 16 years for raping and killing a kid. He had a couple of weeks to go. He said he wanted to get out from the main jail and finish his time in protection. He was warned against it, but he thought, he'd be sweet after 16 years. He thought that no one would know him. Anyway, they found him in the weights room with his head caved in. A mate of Neddy Smith's was the main suspect, but he beat the charge. End quote. Now nearly 20 years after the crimes, former District Court Judge Michael Finnane still doesn't understand what was behind the crimes. Aside from what appears to be an insatiable lust for human suffering, no one really knows what the motivation of the gang was. It would appear it was just unbridled, targeted hate let loose on the wider society.